Hey, friends. I'm Lisa Lisser, and I'm your host on Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter. I'm also the CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. I know the fear and the overwhelm of divorce firsthand, and I'm here to provide the help for you in ways that are both obvious and not so obvious. You can think of me as your guide on the side. Today, I am very excited to welcome Jonathan D. Steele, who is an attorney, to help us discover some of the pitfalls you may face after divorce is final. Jonathan is a distinguished family law attorney known for his strong representation in cases involving divorce, child custody, and paternity. His practice integrates both personal and digital protections for clients. Jonathan advanced from Nadler, Pritkin, and Mirabelli to partner at Bierman LLP, earning accolades like Illinois Super Lawyers Rising Star and Leading Lawyers Emerging Lawyer. Recognized among the top 10 family law attorneys under 40, he combines legal expertise with advanced digital security, offering comprehensive solutions for complex family matters. And before we get into it, let's know that we are watching the new streaming network, home of Going Solo Media and WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio, Podcast, and TV. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Roku TV, and wherever you stream your shows and podcasts. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Jonathan, I'm so excited to have you talk a little bit about next steps. What happens after the court signs that petition? Not that petition, that MSA, the marital settlement agreement. But before we get there, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and how you came to this field?
Sure. I'm a Chicago native, born and raised. Have been here my whole life outside of college where I went to Indiana. And I got into family law starting with a clerkship at the age of 16 and have not left since then. So I've been in it a while as a lawyer for about 12 years at this point.
So wait, let me ask you a question. You got in early at a clerkship at 16? Tell us more.
Yeah, I had a family law attorney that was a friend of the family, and I needed a summer job. And at first, it just started out with sort of gopher things, go get my car washed, do some filing, and just being curious. I would read everything that I would come across. So it ended up being a pretty good learning experience. And then the responsibilities grew from get the car washed to a little bit more legal work over time.
Cool. That's great. That really shows a little bit of taking advantage of a great opportunity.
I think so.
Sometimes when kids get those summer jobs, they don't actually make the most of them. They say, let's take out the car to get washed and maybe ride around for a little while. So I'm impressed already.
I'm not saying I didn't do a little bit of that, but I did try to make the most of that opportunity.
Okay, that's great. So after you went to law school, you knew that family law was the direction you wanted to go?
I've always known I wanted to be a lawyer. I'm still not 100% sold on family law, but here I am. It's a very emotional field for my personality, but it's sort of what I fell into just from that clerkship carrying on into practicing.
Okay, so what would you say is the greatest thing you find practicing in family law?
I think it's a good opportunity to give people a fresh start. A lot of people look at what I do as, well, either I'm the black sheep of the legal community because, family law lawyers aren't real lawyers, or I'm viewed as sort of ending marriages, which isn't a good thing either. But the other side of that is that if it's a bad marriage, I'm giving people an opportunity to move on to a better situation. So I like to look at it that way.
So really what you're doing is you're giving people fresh starts.
I think so.
And that's really important. And that's really what we're here to talk about, the fresh start piece of it. And even though it's a fresh start, sometimes people have a hard time letting go. And that's when they need you for their next chapter. Because when people have a hard time letting go, you feel like it's never over. So I wonder if you could share a couple of stories or some scenarios that you encounter maybe multiple times where people are having a hard time letting go.
A couple come to mind where maybe it's just luck of the draw, but I'm thinking of a couple male clients that didn't want to be divorced. They were surprised by their wife filing for divorce. And because of that, it became extremely contentious during the actual pre-decree portion of the case. And then post-decree, as you're touching on, they didn't seem ready even at that point, once they already were divorced, to be divorced. And so the post-decree litigation carried on for, in one case that I'm thinking of, about a decade of post-decree work. So I think I
Wow.
attribute that to I wasn't ready to be divorced. I wasn't ready to move on. It's some sort of like clinging to that relationship by continuing to litigate with that person.
So what do you think could have encouraged those people to reframe and recognize that where they were was actually their new beginning?
I think, some people have a hard time moving on until they've actually moved on. And what I mean by that is, sometimes replacing that life partner that they chose is what they're waiting for to be able to move on. And sometimes that's just how long is it going to take before I meet someone new and start to share my life with that person. And I think that's a little bit easier nowadays, with the advent of uh, online dating, Hinge, Bumble, that kind of thing. So that helps people to get back into the dating scene and to meet someone, and that helps them, I think, move on.
So, it's interesting because when you're not a single person and you hear about the apps, I think it's easy to think that the apps make it easier. But when you are involved in the apps, as many of my clients are, it almost feels like it's harder because you're looking at classified ads and you're not meeting people in real time. And then you feel like you're a commodity. And so you might have come out of a relationship where you feel the relationship was about objectifying and not being person to person, and now you're back in that. So that can be a challenge in trying to move forward for some people. But I'm listening to your story about the male in that situation who couldn't let go, and sometimes that's about control and wanting to continue to control a situation that they felt became out of their hands. And I wonder where that shift, how do you learn that by letting go of control of this situation, you actually can regain control of your life and your future? Like how does like where is the lawyer's role in sharing that? And then I see my role as a coach as another avenue for people to get there.
Yeah, I think it's a one of those things that's probably easier said than done. People have their own pace, their own cadence in terms of how they move on. In the case that I was referring to, I think what added to the difficulty in moving forward for my client was watching his wife move on. She replaced him.
Mm.
She found a new boyfriend very quickly, in fact, while the case was still going on. So he's trying to mourn the loss of his relationship with her while watching her move on. And it just seemed like he was on a hamster wheel. He could not move forward. He was stuck.
Yeah. So the stuck piece is really hard. And um, I find many of my clients see themselves in that same stuck place where they just keep on telling themselves a story and they want to stay in the story that they've been telling themselves. But divorce, as hard as it is, it can force people to get out of that stuck story if they can see the door or the window at the end of the road. And when they can, and with the help of a coach or an attorney who can find the right words, right? Because sometimes they just don't hear the words, even if they are the right words. But people need to find that opportunity to listen and to see what's right in front of themselves. And so maybe a pitfall, if we use that language, is not seeing the open windows in front of you because you're so busy looking at the closed door behind you.
I think that that's a great analogy. The one I try to give sometimes to clients is they're sort of frozen looking at how tall the staircase is, and they need to be looking at the stair in front of them and not the whole staircase. To your point earlier about where's the lawyer's role in this process of moving forward, almost nowhere. That's just not what lawyers are trained for. We look at it as sort of like, here's your judgment. You have moved on as far as the law is concerned, but there's emotions there. And emotions historically can be difficult for lawyers to navigate. I look at it sort of like I broke my foot a few years ago. And as far as the orthopedic surgeon was concerned, I was healed when the bone was fused back together. And he didn't want to see me anymore, but my foot still hurt a ton. It was not healed as far as I was concerned. I needed physical therapy. I needed all sorts of like home-based therapy to be able to, walk normal and things like that. And, he's the doctor. He's like, oh, no, I'm good. I did my job. Your bone's healed. So that's the lawyer there. They did their job when they gave you your divorce decree.
So maybe then that's the opportunity moment when you see that your client just wants to keep going, to say, okay, maybe there's someone else who can help support you through this process. And maybe this is the time to seek out other support. And sometimes the therapist is the right person to see what's going on inside that is preventing you from moving forward. And sometimes it's the coach who's saying, look at where you are now and what are the steps you can take to move forward. One of the quotes that I often use is that Seneca, and I don't know when this was said, but Seneca said that every beginning is another beginning's end. So anytime you start something new, you had to close the door on something else that was new once. And so it's hard. It's hard to make those kinds of transitions, but that's what it means when your divorce is complete. And every time you do motion practice after the divorce is complete, you're in denial that the divorce is complete and you're divorced.
Yeah,
So,
I think there's a couple buckets of post-decree litigation that sometimes are unavoidable, but
okay.
a lot of them are avoidable. One of the most contentious cases I've ever worked on ran up, I don't know, $1 million in legal fees before the divorce was over. And then it was clear to me right when the divorce was over, this case is going to go on. These people aren't ready. Neither side is ready to move on with their life. And I withdrew from that case because I didn't want to feel like I was enabling the client to continue on the path to nowhere. He replaced me, and I think to this day continues to litigate. So maybe I didn't, it didn't work. But I thought, if I'm sending a message to the client by saying, I don't want any part of this anymore. You're divorced, let it go, move on. And I do think it is easier said than done for a lot of people. But certainly avoiding the avoidable post-decree litigation should be everybody's focus.
Yeah, definitely. And there's the avoiding the post-decree motions and fighting. And it's not just for the couple, but it's for their kids, because you really want to be role models for your children. And when we talk about best interests of the child, you want to think about that as you move forward. I was having a conversation with another attorney earlier today who is a parent coordinator as well as a litigator and a mediator. And she talked to me about how parents continue to argue about the picayune things that really shouldn't be an argument, but it's because they're holding on to other issues that are between them, but not about the child. And so with my clients, I try and encourage them to say, this is not about you anymore. It's about the kids. So do you have any stories to tell about situations that involve the kids that went forward and you could have seen another way?
Yeah, there's a couple that come to mind. One of them is, I divorced a couple where they had very young children, and some years down the road, their children were bar and bat mitzvah age, and the mechanics, the logistics of trying to plan bar and bat mitzvahs
Mm.
was just a nightmare for these people. They ended up having separate bar and bat mitzvahs where they were each, wedding sized, because they just couldn't come to terms on how many invitations both sides got and how the expenses were going to be shared. And so the outcome was silly, which was, let's just do it times two. And that happens. And then, like clockwork, every year there's the holiday. When does winter break split in the middle? I don't know why that's just so hard for people to sort out. It's a calendar, it's on there every year. But every year, people come flooding into the office on emergencies. I need to have the court order. Here's when halfway point is for winter break. And so you talk about sort of minutia that people fight over. That's the kind of thing that nobody should be going to lawyers for, the kind of thing that nobody should be going to the courts for. That's where parenting coordination can be helpful, because you're paying a fraction and you're dealing with something that's judges don't want to deal with. And it's much less expensive. And there's a handful of resources that keeps growing. So at one point it was go to mediation. Now it's parenting coordination. I think, there are other resources that can help people avoid court in general for little things like that. And they should be using as many of them as work. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's about educating yourself on what can we do if we disagree before we talk to our lawyers? Like, how many steps can we try before we go to what should be our last step instead of our first step? And not that I don't want people to talk to you. I'm not trying to put you out of business, but after the divorce is final, when it comes to things like, how do I divide my vacation? First of all, that should be in the MSA, in the marital settlement agreement. It should be there. What is that schedule every year, on or off? 7, 4 out of the 7 or 3 out of the 7, whatever the days are. And people should be able to count. But it's still a hard one. And I get it. People want to sort of crave time, but I think that they've already lost time. And so maybe that's what makes it such a hot button.
As lawyers, we do the best we can in terms of mapping out all the possible contingencies that life throws at people. But it's almost impossible to draft for every scenario. At some point, you sort of have to hope that people can be reasonable adults and they can work something out. And we try to, bake into all of our agreements some sort of alternative dispute resolution to basically keep business away from us down the road, because people don't need to be coming to lawyers to hash out when does winter break start. And so that's why we've tried, putting in a mediation requirement, court as a last resort, go to parenting coordination, even arbitration sometimes. So we try to, keep people out of the court system, but sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes people find their way back, and they use those resources as sort of a stepping stone to getting back into court because they want that fight to continue.
Yeah, it's too bad. Well, on that note, we're going to take a 30-second break and then we will be back with more post-divorce pitfalls and how you can avoid them. And we're back with Jonathan Steele. So, Jonathan, we've spoken about motion practice and we've spoken about the kids. Let's talk a little bit about post-divorce pitfalls related to support and alimony. What would you say is like the most outrageous case you've seen where the parties had to come, or one party had to come back in to enforce an alimony or child support situation?
That I see it as there's sort of three big buckets for post-decree litigation. There's modification, there's enforcement, and then there's sort of clarification or interpretation. I've seen some post-decree enforcement actions due to non-payment of whether it's maintenance, child support, or both, where the money being sought was just shy of $1 million because somebody just sort of thumbing their nose at the court system for 18 years of the child's life. So I've seen huge dollar amounts, huge collection actions. And, that's spite. That's, I don't want to pay child support because it's, going to the other parent and it's not being spent on the child. And I shouldn't have to pay maintenance or alimony because I worked and he or she didn't. And why are they getting half of my money? And the unfortunate reality for the payor there is you're going to owe that money. And at the end of the day, there's a price to pay. And on top of what you owe by not paying, you're going to probably end up paying legal fees on both sides of the case. So if you owed $100,000 in maintenance and you push it all the way to a trial on a contempt petition, you may end up owing $200,000, whether it's 100 plus interest that you owed, and then attorney's fees on both sides of the equation. And it doesn't make any sense to pay 200 when you could have just paid 100.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you're right when you talk about spite. Like that doesn't end just because the divorce is final. And again, it's about not facing the fact that it's time to look at your future and not at your past. Divorce is about being forward centered as opposed to being backward looking. And that's really important with all of the kids and keeping the kids in mind. And, not looking at the good old days, because if they were good old days, then the couple wouldn't be in your office in the first place. So, have you had like a favorite client that, you missed when the deal was settled?
I have a few clients where their cases are over and we stay in contact because I like them. They like me. So yeah, I like to stay in contact. I don't always just wash my hands of the client and say, goodbye. So, if it were someone I was going to miss, then there's probably still around. We still, catch up every once in a while. Hopefully not on the hourly basis, and they don't need legal services. They're just catching up on, here's where I am in my life now. And, I've moved on and I'm much happier in a new relationship or a new family. So it's always good to, hear about the other side of the equation. Now things have gotten better because it's easy to, get sort of jaded in this practice and hear just negative things all day, every day. So to hear once in a while the positive on the end of it is encouraging, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure. I find the same thing when I've worked with a client and it was really a struggle getting through the divorce, and then a few years later you hear that they're getting married or they've gotten a really great job. I was thinking another question for you is, sometimes people really fight going back to work. They haven't worked in 16 years or 18 years or whatever it's been, and they feel like they're unemployable. And so they almost have to prove their own valuelessness in order to get the alimony they think they're entitled to. So it's really sort of like a catch 22. They have to prove they're not worth much in order to get the alimony. But if they went to work and then could feel some value, they would be in a much better head place. And so I wonder if you've seen people who are in that situation, but then did ultimately start working in meaningful jobs and found a new identity with new power.
Yeah, that can be tough. It's a delicate balance between, you know, demonstrating why you're a maintenance or alimony candidate and then jumping right back on the employment wagon. I have seen clients that, they have that 10, 20-year gap in their resume because they gave up their career in favor of having a family and being the non-breadwinner. And then they have to get back into the workforce because they're still at an employable age. And, maybe they got some rehabilitative maintenance so that they could get back on their feet. But the plan was for them to do that. And I've seen people that have either resumed the career they gave up or just started something entirely new, which often it helps to have some assets that were awarded to you in the divorce, sort of as your capital for starting a new venture.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. Like you need to have something that you can rely on while you're trying out something new. So that makes a lot of sense. Um, what else do you think that our audience needs to know about post-divorce pitfalls? Even that might not come from the conflict, but might just come from trying to start fresh.
I think it's hard for people with kids to accept that they can't control what's going on in the other parent's home, that it's
Mhm.
in an ideal world, you have sort of a cohesive set of rules that's being applied to raising a child. But at the end of the day, that's hard to enforce. That's hard to put teeth to. And if you're raising your kids with a separate set of rules than your ex is raising, you sort of have to just accept it. It's hard to accept. It's hard to think, I have to just relinquish control entirely. These are my kids. I want to know that they're safe and that they're being raised how I'm raising them and that they're brushing their teeth every night and that they're not using iPads at certain hours and that they're not using social media. And some of that stuff you can bake into your agreement, but some of it's just a matter of you need to relinquish the control. You need to stop trying to micromanage what's going on in the other parent's home, unless it's something that is just clearly harmful to them. Certainly you don't need to relinquish control to allow them to start cage fighting if they're 8 years old or, watching R-rated movies. There's certain things you can do stuff about. But short of that kind of hyperbolic example, you do just sort of have to trust that maybe you don't like the other person, maybe they don't like you, but you have a shared interest in parenting your kids. And so you have to sort of hope that for the best.
Yeah. And that's the hardest thing is to hand off and to let go of the control. Um, and in many relationships, control was a big part of the issue in the marriage. Who was controlling what? And so letting go of the control is may have been the issue all along. So it doesn't stop being the issue once you're divorced. A lot of people, I think, believe somewhere that once they get divorced, they won't have to deal with the other person anymore. But when you have kids, you are going to have to deal with that person as long as you have kids. It might not be to the same extent now when they get older, but they're always going to be a part of your life. So, how you develop that relationship is really important, and what you learn to communicate about and how you communicate will have a long-term impact.
That's a harsh reality for clients. It's hard to explain to someone that comes in and they're telling you, "I'm getting divorced because we couldn't figure out how to communicate. Communication was our downfall. We couldn't figure it out, and so we're getting divorced." And I have to explain to people that it wasn't one or the other. It's not we couldn't figure it out, so we get divorced, and then we don't need to figure it out anymore. If you have kids together, you have kids together forever. And so you need to figure out communication with the other parent, whether you're staying married or not, because you have kids together. You need to make decisions together. You need to plan all the way out to their weddings together. And, it's just not a this or that situation like people tend to think that it is. Communication is obviously one of the biggest reasons that people end up getting divorced. It sort of underlies a ton of other symptoms. But it's hard for people to, I get a blank look almost every time when I tell someone it's not you're getting divorced and therefore you don't need to figure communication out anymore.
Yeah. But what I will share with our audience is that communication may feel like it's getting worse when you first get divorced, and it may in fact be getting worse when you first get divorced. And then it may get better. So as people say, time heals all things, and heal is a word of degrees, but it gets easier. If you can accept that now you need to learn how to deal with each other, then what's really hard in the beginning becomes less hard once you get used to the new reality. And once the kids get used to the new reality. But while the kids see that it's so difficult for you, they have a lot of different responses. Like they can either play you guys against each other, which will make it worse. But that might be in their interest, or they might think it's in their interest because they're kids and they just don't know. Or they can try to be perfect to heal you guys, and that's going to have a really hard impact on them because no one can be perfect. So our role as the grown-ups in the room, as the parents, is to do our best and show up as our best rather than let our more difficult natures take over. And that's what I work with all of my clients.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the kids have to come first, and they will try to play you against each other. Kids are smart. I don't want to say they're manipulative, but they're smart. They know how to maneuver situations to get the things that they want. What's unfortunate in a divorce situation is that kids like to own the divorce. They like to, if they blame themselves, then they have some element of control over the situation. Whereas if they think they're just passengers along for the ride, then they have no ability to control anything. It's harder for them. So they like to own it. And they need to understand, no matter what age they're at, that you're not divorcing because of them. It has nothing to do with them. They're going to be okay. You're going to have two homes at the end of the divorce, and that everything's going to be fine for them. But it's hard for kids, or it can be hard for kids to sort of try to accept, I had no hand in this. No matter what I say or do, it had nothing to do with this, just because they want to. They want to have a hand in it. They want to have an element of control over the situation.
That's a really great observation and awareness that everything we do to tell the kids this isn't about you. It's not because of you. the kids may not even be able to hear that, because part of making it about them is giving them a sense of control. And we all want to feel like we can control situations that are out of our hands. And so when we think about, this one is acting out and I don't know how to handle that one anymore, speaking of our kids, that's where we need to like let our compassion and our empathy energies come out. And if that is pushing our buttons then with our spouse, again, pause. Don't jump to conclusions, but find ways to communicate. And again, work with a coach, work with a therapist. Don't make a motion. So don't talk to Jonathan. Sorry, Jonathan, but don't talk to Jonathan.
No, I agree with you. In terms of pitfalls, I think that using your lawyer for everything isn't in and of itself a pitfall. Things feel like they're legal issues. Things feel like you need legal advice. But most of the time, especially post-decree, it's not a legal issue. You don't need legal advice. You need life advice. You need someone in your corner to just help you think clearly. And that doesn't need to be a lawyer at the rates that lawyers are charging you. There are more qualified people that can, help guide you through whatever the situation may be, whether it's modification, enforcement, clarification of your judgment. While those may seem like legal issues, if you can't resolve them amicably, there's always the opportunity of resolving things amicably. There's opportunity to, change things at least on your side of the fence. And there are therapists if you need therapy, if you are, unpacking traumas, and if you have some sort of mental health issues, they're going to be way more qualified than a lawyer to be able to assist. And then there's coaches that, they're going to be more forward looking. They're going to be more able to help guide you through what you need to be doing with your life. And that's just most of the time, there are not legal issues. When I get phone calls on the weekend about, my spouse is sitting close to me at a soccer game, it's not a legal issue. It's just a, get up and go to the other side of the field issue. Anybody with a mouth can tell you that. And so, leaning on your lawyers after your divorce is over, it's hard to say it, but let it go. Let the lawyer go. You're still using it as a crutch. A lot of times there's a tendency in a divorce to use your lawyer as a weapon, try to get revenge against your spouse. And so it's easy to sort of think, I'm going to keep this guy on the payroll and in my corner from now on. And there's just, not putting the money aside, there are just more qualified people that are able to help outside of the legal community.
So thank you so much, Jonathan. I appreciate that's almost a statement against interest, but it's actually a statement within interest, because you want to really serve your clients, and letting them know when the service is complete is serving your clients. So with that, thank you for sharing your thoughts on post-divorce pitfalls and how you can avoid them. How can our viewers get in touch with you?
I can be reached by email, jsteele@biermanlaw.com. That's the fastest way. I have no boundaries. I've got my phone in my hand all the time, and so I'm pretty responsive on my email.
Okay, terrific. And you can reach me at lisa@lzlcoaching.com. I give 30-minute free consultations for anyone who's really interested in divorce coaching and wants to know more. And I will let you know that we are listening and watching to WGSN-DB Going Solo Network Radio, podcasts, and TV. And you can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Roku TV, and wherever you stream your shows and podcasts. Thank you so much. And we will see you next week on another episode of Dishing on Divorce.